Welcome back to Malden's Revolution. I'm Mark Linehan. 250 years ago today, on March 5th, 1776, the people of Massachusetts gathered in Watertown for the annual commemoration of the bloody massacre that had taken place 6 years earlier. And to give the oration for the first Boston Massacre anniversary since the war began, the people of Massachusetts turn to the minister of the first parish in Malden, the young and popular Reverend Peter Thatcher, who uses the oration to call upon the people of America to declare themselves a free and independent republic. Many of the people attending Peter Thatcher's oration in Watertown were Bostonians, patriots who had been forced to flee their homes in the first days of the war, many of them having not seen their homes for almost a year. These Bostonians were unlikely to be familiar with the Reverend Peter Thatcher. Aside from his work for the Provincial Congress writing the official account of the Battle of Bunker Hill, Thatcher's entire adult ministry had been in Malden, and he was still quite young, only 24 years old. But while the Bostonians exiled in Watertown may not have known Peter, they would have been very familiar with Peter Thatcher's father, Oxenbridge. Oxenbridge Thatcher, besides having an unnecessarily awesome name, was a lawyer who came from a long line of ministers. Almost all the men in both directions of his family tree were ministers, but unfortunately, due to his feeble frame and weak voice, it was decided that the law was a more suitable profession for him. He read for the law under a lawyer named Jeremy Gridley, with another young lawyer named James Otis. Today, every tourist on the Freedom Trail in downtown Boston walks by James Otis's grave here in the Granary Burying Ground, but in the 1760s, Otis's fame came primarily from his arguments against the writs of assistance, during which he declared that taxation without representation is tyranny, and that every man's home is his castle. Forgotten today was that two lawyers argued against the writs. The other lawyer arguing alongside him was Oxenbridge Thatcher. James Otis and Oxenbridge became known almost as an anti-crown Waldorf and Statler, a dynamic duo for colonial rights, and both were subsequently elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Throughout the 1750s and 60s, Oxenbridge Thatcher mentored younger lawyers, and one of the lawyers he took under his wing was a young man named John Adams. Our future second president said of Oxenbridge, quote, "There was not a citizen of Boston more universally beloved for his learning, ingenuity, every domestic and social virtue, and conscientious conduct in every relation of life." Unfortunately, Oxenbridge's ill health led to his premature death in 1765 at the age of only 45. His seat in the House of Representatives was filled by one Samuel Adams. Another young lawyer Oxenbridge mentored was Josiah Quincy Jr., who took over Oxenbridge's legal practice after his death. And 5 years later, Josiah Quincy and John Adams together successfully defended the soldiers who committed the Boston Massacre, the event that 250 years ago today, Oxenbridge's son, the Reverend Peter Thatcher of Malden, was chosen to commemorate. To be chosen to give the Boston Massacre anniversary oration was a great honor. In 1772 and in 1775, the oration had been given by Dr. Joseph Warren, the head of the Committee of Safety and the great martyr of the Battle of Bunker Hill, the battle that the Reverend Thatcher had personally witnessed. It's not terribly important, but I want you to know that when Dr. Warren gave the oration in 1775, he wore a toga. I'm not kidding. While not wearing a toga, the Reverend Peter Thatcher's oration was very well received. In it, Thatcher never speaks about the actual massacre or its victims at all, but it being the first massacre anniversary of the war, he focused his talents solely on the war itself and how we got to this place. He then closed by loudly and boldly demanding that America be an independent republic. Now, it cannot be overstated how tectonic a shift it was for North Americans to call for American independence. Radical voices for independence were relatively few until January 1776, with the publication of a pamphlet by Thomas Paine titled Common Sense. It's estimated that Common Sense sold 100,000 copies in its first year, which is particularly impressive when you remember that there are only about 2.5 million English colonists in all of North America. With Common Sense published less than 2 months before, and with almost all the other leading political voices of Massachusetts either serving in the Army or serving in Congress in Philadelphia, it's possible that Peter Thatcher's oration was one of the most well-known public speeches in support of independence in Massachusetts since the war began. Congress would not declare us separate from Great Britain for another 4 months. After Thatcher's speech, the inhabitants of Boston immediately requested that it be published and distributed. The 16-page pamphlet may not be the most sought-after document of the Revolutionary period, and surviving copies are somewhat rare, but 10 years ago, a copy of Thatcher's oration sold at auction for $1,200. And this won't be the last time Peter Thatcher of Malden receives acclaim calling for American independence. But 250 years ago, the passion of Thatcher's oration was quickly overshadowed by current events. The night before Peter Thatcher's speech, General George Washington had moved prefabricated defenses and Henry Knox's recently delivered artillery onto the Dorchester Heights. The Continental Army now has heavy artillery both south and west of Boston, but the lines north of the city, the lines through Malden, are still woefully under-defended. Will George Washington launch a direct assault against the city, or will Boston be destroyed from afar? Will General Howe try to break the siege by crossing the Mystic River? See you soon.